News item, Republican strategy for Georgia's January 5th, 2021 crucial two-seat Senate race, plus the Republican national strategy were recently divulged. Georgia Republican senators running for re-election are asking Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who is a Republican, to resign because he did not rig the election so they would not have to be in a runoff in January 2021. Republicans David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler said, "What good is it to have a Republican Secretary of State if he will not follow organized crime?" Sorry, we mean the Republican Party's election program. You have sorely disappointed the Godfather and his lieutenant, Lindsey Graham, and there will be consequences. David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler went on in the interview to say, in addressing Brad Raffensperger, "The Don's minions donated to your campaign and you showed no respect by attempting to run a clean election. Part of the problem might be your engineering science background. In the Republican Party, we are not constrained by science. My God, you even were adhering to risk-limiting audits science on the presidential election recount. Why do you think Senator Mitch McConnell, Don of the Senate majority, blocked Securing America's Federal Elections Act, SAFE Act, and For the People Act, from even being heard in the Senate? Among other things, it contains risk limit audits of human readable ballots. With approximately 55% of the voting public starting to recognize corruption as a problem for their survival, the Republican Party will never win another election if we have honest elections. In the tradition of the mafia, Republican enforcer Steve Bannon said, "Dr. Fauci and the director of the FBI should have their heads cut off and put on a pike if they do not get with the program." Bannon's warning applies to you, Mr. Secretary of State. Trump, the Don to us, Republicans, expects complete loyalty in the ranks, or there will be consequences. There is still time to redeem yourself in the upcoming Georgia Senate races. The voting machines and tabulation software Georgia uses have some potentially hackable entry points as election fraud detection activists have pointed out. With your cooperation, we can win in January. We will follow the Don's game plan. Alert our voters to vote in person and not by mail as Trump did in the general election, by constantly casting doubt on mail-in ballots. We then hack the vulnerable voting machines, which in Georgia print out a paper ballot with proprietary barcode that no human can read. Then remember in any audit to automatically scan the barcode instead of tallying the selected candidates' printed names on the ballot. As in the general election, our voters will come to the polls in higher numbers, and we can follow the Don's example and claim the hand-marked mail-in ballots are manipulated or other vague problems with mail-in ballots. Remember, do not do a risk limit audit of the actual ballot's candidate's name selected. We and Capo Dia Capi, Mr. T, will actually be watching, and we expect a lead. Mr. Secretary of State of Georgia, if you show allegiance to Mr. T, you do not have to worry about getting caught. The Don and his consigliere, Giuliani, will put up a smoke screen that will protect you. We want to catch you up now on a little history to show you how well protected you will be if you tilt the scale for us. Remember in 2016 in North Carolina, where before the exit polls were reweighted to conform to the cast vote, the deviation of the cast vote from the exit polls in favor of Trump was so much greater than the margin of error that it could only happen in 1 in 18,000 elections. This was a big red flag to the 25 or so election experts in the U.S., but ignored by the major media and the Democratic National Committee, DNC, type Democrats like Hillary Clinton. DNC types do not understand computerized voting system vulnerabilities, but Mr. T and Pence and his religious right teams do. And among the others, we have ins with ES&S voting machine company, which has a long history with the Republican Party. You might want to read this article to understand ES&S relationship to the Republican Party. It's titled, America's Largest and Arguably Most Problematic Voting Machine Vendor is ES&S, not Dominion Voting. In September 2020, a Texas Examiner report said there was a bug in ES&S's hash verification script. What happened after this is unknown. The article is by Jennifer Cohen. Edison Research, the exit poll company the major media uses for election predictions, attempted to explain this 18,001 anomaly by saying that they must have done the sampling wrong in 3 swing states with large shifts from the exit polls compared to the cast vote in favor of Trump. If the major media or DNC looked at with any depth, they would have noticed that Edison Research sampling methods in 2016 were perfect in the 2 largest and most diverse states, Texas and California. In California, the deviation from the exit poll to cast vote count was 0.0%, and in Texas, 0.3%, which is statistically a perfect prediction by the exit polls. By deduction, this says Edison Research has the sampling science of exit polls well worked out. Brad, you being a science guy, can understand the 2 tables below, one showing California and Texas, perfect predictions, and the other showing North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, critical swing states, which we tilted the 2000 election to Mr. T. This is a more detailed look at both 2016 and 2020 election. It can be found at saveyourfreedoms.us. The procedures that can spoil our electronic vote flipping plans are hand-marked paper ballots with good chain of custody protocols and risk-limiting audits. Brad, we hope you understand why the Don wants his voters to go to the polls, especially in states without hand-marked paper ballots and without risk-limiting audits, and why Mr. T derided mail-in ballots in 2020, knowing his minions will follow his advice and the Dems will largely do the opposite. The Don understands the best defense is an offense, which is why he immediately screams mail-in ballots are fraudulent. In contrast, the weak liberal DNC Democrats like Biden defensively, between sips of expensive wine and polite musings on culture, they say the election is without fraud. Of course, the DNC types do not understand election electronic fraud is near impossible to detect without hand-marked paper ballots and risk-limiting audits. A little software update here and there serves our vote flipping and our fractional vote algorithms purpose. This is not to say the 2020 election was the most secure in history, but the qualifier that Christopher Krebs, whom Trump fired, should have said is secure from foreign state actors like Russia or China, not necessarily from domestic malfeasance from the Republican Party. That truth would have gotten him fired faster. We Repubs are so lucky Krebs did not look into the domestic election fraud. What we have to watch out for is AOC and Bernie-type Democrats who actually speak up once they are informed. Lucky for us Trumpers, Biden is surrounded by an uninformed consultocracy that never advises speaking up about complicated election fraud issues. Otherwise, he would answer the Don's accusation of the vote being rigged with, "Yes, Mr. Trump, there was election fraud in favor of the Republicans. The vote was heavily rigged by the Republican Party between false purges of likely Democratic voters, poll closings in Democratic voter areas, gerrymandering in favor of Republicans, and perhaps most importantly, Republican Senator Mitch McConnell blocking election reform legislation that would have allowed for hand-marked paper ballots and risk-limiting audits. In addition, the 2020 presidential election, it appears your operatives shifted the tallied votes in 11 states more than the margin of error in your favor, and in favor of Republican senators. The malfeasance by the Republican machine in the 2020 election appears even greater than in the 2016 elections. The Biden-Harris victory was likely more overwhelming than the official vote count. Given the large likely fraud-based Republican shifts from exit polls, the surprise Senate and House of Representatives Republican victories might prove to be false upon a real investigation. Brad, you can see from the two tables, one showing the unexpected beyond statistical margin of error shifts to our Don, Mr. T, and the next table showing the unexpected shift to Republican senators like us. The two Republican candidates in Georgia went on to say, "We count on Biden never speaking truth to power, since he is a polite, weak liberal, and we can count on our base hating Biden and defending us with violence. Our brown shirts, we mean Proud Boys, will sow chaos and violence and defend us, and the police will be on our side, as in another era around 1938 in Germany." Brad Raffensperger, even though you have angered us by attempting to run a fair election, we now have the inconvenience of a runoff on January 5th, 2021. We know your prior good deeds for the Georgia Republican Party when you purged almost 200,000 voters. So we know you're capable of another tribute to the Don and us in our election bid. Remember, Brad, get with the Republican Party program, which is 1. Purge voter rolls of likely Democratic voters, such as Afro-Americans, Latinx, Asian Americans. 2. Change voter ID laws so as to make it harder for minorities to vote. 3. Close polling places in high Democratic voter regions. 4. Redraw district lines to favor Republicans, that is, gerrymander. 5. Generally make it harder for poor people to vote. 6. In critical swing states, change electronic voting system software to stealthily change votes in Republican favor and get Republicans to prefer voting at polls and deride mail-in voting. Number 7, block any legislation that would require hand-marked paper ballots with a secure chain of custody and risk-limiting audits of election results. Liberal Democrats like Biden and Clinton have shown they will seldom speak up about the broken election system. They will just leave it up to the Democratic grassroots, which have no voice in the major media, but that they will attempt registration drives to overwhelm Republican chicanery, as Stacey Abrams is doing in Georgia. With malice and reward to you if you signed Georgia Senators David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler.